How many of you would agree that when management is not holding people accountable, that starts impacting everyone else's morale? You agree with that? This is actually one of the more common things we see in the organization is a lack of accountability. There's this sort of intuitive, and I think falsely intuitive idea that if I hold people accountable, that's going to bring down morale. Well, it may bring down the morale temporarily of the person you're holding accountable, but it will bring up everybody else's morale. Right? So we have accountability. What else?
Inclusion.
So people feeling included, people feeling part of things, part of the team. Good.
Leading by example.
Yeah, managers who lead by example, leaders who lead by example. Now there is research on this, and I've seen this, and this is going to sound like one of the more snarky things I'm going to say today. But what we do tend to find, again, based on research and in real life where we see this, is the higher you are in an organization, the more likely you're going to break the rules. And we see that as simple as, for example, it's going to be someone from the C-suite who's going to come to meetings and use their phone the whole time, even though everyone else has been told not to do that. It's going to be someone from the C-suite who's going to come into a meeting late and then say, "Catch me up, everybody." And we're like, "Really? We have to do that?" And so you just tend to get a little bit more likelihood of the bad behaviors the higher you go, which then, of course, creates this whole hypocritical vibe, doesn't it? This whole vibe of do as I say, not as I do, which can really put a chink in the armor of morale. So, over here.
Giving good feedback.
Feedback, a culture of feedback. An organization that knows when and how to give feedback, and people know how to receive it. Do you guys agree with that? Yeah. And we're going to be absolutely spending time on that topic several times in the 5 days.
Trust.
Trust, yeah, people trust each other. Absolutely good. Let me go back around one more time over here.
Yeah, like setting people up for success.
Yes.
Matching their strengths with.
Matching their strengths with their work.
Yeah.
Their work with their strengths. Good. Setting people up for success. Good. Over here.
Work-life balance.
Yes. An organization that allows people to have a real life. Good. Over here.
Like you're being a part of the process.
Yeah, one of the things that we're going to talk about on day 4 is the whole concept of participatory decision making and having your people at least have a voice in decisions. And we're going to talk about 6 different ways of deciding. That's absolutely part of a high morale work environment. You guys?
Good benefits.
Benefits, good. Pay and benefits. Over here.
Meaningful work.
The work feels meaningful. I don't just enjoy it, although that is part of it, but it matters. I'm going to open it up now. Give me more stuff on your list. Training, good.
Celebrating success.
Yes, celebrating successes.
Openness to new ideas.
Yes, upper management is open to ideas, open to input.
Safe to make mistakes.
That's a really big one. It's safe to make mistakes, right? A culture where mistakes aren't an opportunity for punishment, but it is an opportunity for growth. Good. What else?
Caring. Empathy kind of go along.
Empathy. Good. Caring, empathy.
Personal relationships and friendships.
Building relationships with people.
The culture actually matches the stated values.
Yes, I don't mean to laugh at that one, but I'm a cynical consultant because I've worked with hundreds of companies, and I cannot tell you how many times we watch companies spend days and days creating value statements and mission statements, and then they throw them up on the wall somewhere and never talk about them again. And they never trickle down into the practice. And they certainly don't trickle down into management practices. We've seen that more than we haven't. That was not a good way to say that. We see that most of the time, actually, meaning some level of work done on values and missions that a year later, not only can nobody quote them, no one knows what they said, we're certainly not intentionally doing things to match our behaviors with those. So that's really common. What else?
Development plan or growth plan.
Absolutely. Advancement, growth, a plan to help people move forward. What else is on your list? I want you to mine deep on this one. Anything else that we're missing from your list? Transparency, right? And including communication, right? Transparency. Compensation. Good.
Employee recognition.
recognizing, appreciating, celebrating good things that happen, good qualities, good behaviors.
Having flexibility, like how people want to work.
Yeah, giving people some flexibility in their work, good.
Safe and productive physical workplace.
The physical, let's include that, right? It's safe, it's inviting, it's functional, right? That all contributes to morale. And let's add to that the equipment, the tools, diversity.
Diversity
Yep.
of thought.
Diversity of thought, diversity of people, an openness and even a celebration of that. Very good. Last call. Anything on your list that we're missing?
Success.
Just that you're succeeding, right? I work for a company that's doing good stuff and winning and succeeding. Really good. All right, let's put all this together. I'm going to share with you what research tells us. There's some interesting findings here. Morale comes from 4 main sources. And I think I've heard a lot of this, not all of these from you just now. 4 main sources of morale. Now you're going to see these percentages up there. I just want to say right up front, we made those up. We makes us look smart when we actually have percentages next to our items. So, but we didn't pull them out of thin air, right? This is based on a lot of research. There's not one piece of research. There's not a single piece of research that gives us those 4 numbers. But when you look at the research together and kind of aggregate it, you get these ratios. As you'll hear me say, though, in a very few minutes, I think these are a little off still, but let's go into it. 4 places, 4 sources of morale. We're going to start with this one. And I didn't really hear this one yet, so let's talk about this. How many of you would agree that there is some some personal responsibility for your own morale? Everybody agree with that? Yeah. Now, when I say that, everybody agrees, and in fact, when they agree, they usually think, well, that should not just be 8% then, because that's huge. So let me tell you why we're keeping this so low, because I agree with the 8%, and here's why. Now, I know this isn't kindergarten, but all together now, I want you out loud to read with me the 2 words in the middle. Workplace morale. All right. What it doesn't say is personal happiness. And I want to make sure you get that those are not the same thing. There's a bit of an overlap, let's say, 8%, but we're going to call this is not personal happiness. And here's what we mean by that. I have met some really healthy, happy individual people who have really bad workplace morale. And I've met some really unhealthy, unhappy people who have really good workplace morale. Because workplace morale is a function of the workplace. Now, yes, there's an individual component. Remember we talked about those people that aren't going to be happy unless they're unhappy? Well, I've also met people that could work anywhere and have great morale. I've met those people, but that's not you. And I don't mean to insult anyone in the room, but statistically, you're probably not one of those people on either side of that. Think of it as a bell curve. Okay, think of it as a bell curve. And think of the very end of the tails. Those are those people that could have high morale no matter what kind of workplace they're working in, or could have low morale no matter what kind of workplace they're working in. That's not us. Most of us are somewhere else in that bell curve, and we are highly impacted by the workplace. But when I say workplace, I don't just mean the physical workplace. I mean that whole list that you just created. Those things impact the average person. So we're going to give this 8%. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Now, what this leads to is a side note. It's not up here on purpose, but I'm going to give you a side note here. Let's talk about money for a minute. You're not going to see salaries and money and stuff like that, or even bennies up here. And let's talk about why that is. What they find in the research is that when you give employees a raise, it does increase their workplace morale for 3 weeks. And then what happens to their morale after that? It's right back where it was before. Because what's not happening 6 months after the raise is they're driving to work thinking, God, I hate my boss and meetings suck, but I really have high morale because of that raise I got 6 months ago. No, you know what that raise is affecting at that point? Personal happiness, not workplace morale. Does that ring true? So this is what the research tells us about money. Now here's where it gets a little bit aggravating. Financial money issues actually can hurt morale, though. They can't really help it, right? Well, they could if you decide to give all your people raises every 3 weeks. That would be awesome, right? That's the one way, except for accounting, they have really bad morale. But in reality, money issues can hurt morale, meaning I'm not getting paid the same as you, but we do the same work. I feel like we're equal in our skills and our background, but I'm getting paid less than you. That's going to be a longer term morale hit. And that's not about money. What's that about? That's about fairness, isn't it? That's about fairness, right? Or I'm not getting paid enough to meet my needs. That actually can hurt my morale at work. But can't really help my morale. Money on the other side doesn't really increase morale. So does that surprise anybody? All right. Well, yeah. It's funny because, again, as I've watched companies struggle with morale, they get these company surveys back, and we have a morale problem. They do a lot of things. You know, Genes on Friday and morale committees, and let's deal with money, and it never scratches the itch. It's deeper than those things. All right, so that's the first one. Morale is also impacted by the people you work with every day, right? And I heard people talking about trust and respect. Our morale obviously is going to be impacted by these people that I spend more than half my waking hours with, and by the way they treat me, how open they are. Do they honor diversity? Do I feel included? I heard people talk about inclusion. I mean, there's lots of things here that are going to come from these great people I get to work with, or these people I hate working with, right? That's going to impact my morale at work. Does that ring true for everybody? The third category. This is a big one, meaning we're going to break this one down a little bit. It's the work. It's the work I do impacts morale. And we're going to break this down into 4 categories, and I'm going to ask you to take a really quick side trip with me. We're going to turn the page, but we're going to come back. So turn your page. The work itself impacts morale in 4 different ways. Number 1, I like it. I like the work, obviously, right? The work I've chosen, the career I'm in, the work I've chosen to do, I enjoy it. And that's pretty obvious. That's pretty intuitive, right? That's a piece of morale. The challenge competency continuum, and we're going to take a minute on this one. This is really important. I feel challenged and I feel competent at the same time. Now, it's a little wiggly here to think in terms of like where's the right place to be here. Imagine this being sort of a perfect spot right here. Don't think of this as mediocre on both. Think of this as the perfect spot, right? You should know, and when I say should, I don't mean that in a shaming way, but as a general rule, you should know where your employee would put him or herself on this continuum. You should just know that. And obvious question here, how are you going to find that out? Right, that was rocket science, wasn't it? How are you going to find that out, right? What would it feel like if you asked your employee, right, where would you put yourself on the challenge competency continuum? And they said, well, I'm here. How do you think they're feeling at work? Overwhelmed, stressed. They don't have the time, they don't have the tools, they don't have the people, they don't have the skills. They're never able to go home at night and feel good about what they got done today or what they accomplished, right? How might they be feeling if they said they're over here? Bored, right? And both of these, and there's going to be some brain research on this, tend to engage our sympathetic nervous system. Both of these actually shut down learning. Both of these extremes shut down personal growth. We really have a hard time advancing as human beings when we're stuck over here or we're stuck over here. So let's say you asked your employee, hey, where would you put yourself, Jim, on this continuum over the last 6 months? And Jim said, well, I'm here. Okay, your next question is going to be, where would you like to be, right? And I'm going to guess he's going to put himself somewhere closer to the middle. Now, what's your next question? What can we do to get you there? All right, I like the work. I'm somewhere reasonable on the challenge competency continuum. My work feels important. There's meaning to my work. I'm doing good in this world. I'm helping the world, the community, people, the environment, kids, whatever. I'm making the world a better place somehow, in some way. And the organization is winning, or they're successful, or they're doing a good job. I'm proud of my organization. So you put these together, and those spell this 15% work circle. Now, I bet you money you all know what the fourth circle is called, more or less? What's the word we're going to put in the fourth circle? It's leadership. Yep, you got it. It's leadership. And it makes sense. In fact, according to research, 80% of people who quit their jobs are not really quitting their job. They're quitting their boss, according to research, according to exit interviews. So clearly, we're talking about the main source of morale being leadership. Now, here's what I mean by our numbers maybe a little off. We're going to do a little bit of math, and I hope no one told you there'd be no math. So would you guys go back a page now? And please do not get out a calculator. I want you to estimate this. Do not get out a calculator. What percentage of those items could you put into the green circle? Take a look at that and talk about that at your table for about a minute. Look at that list and ask yourself, how many of those things, what percentage of those things, could you conceivably put into the green circle? I assume you're way above 65%?
Yeah.
Like way above 65%? How many of you would have said probably 85 or more? Yeah. Now, you might not have got super robust on these other ones, so I think it still evens out. But I tell you what, I think this is low. In fact, do you see why I could even borrow some points from here? And I could borrow some points from here? Let's look at that one for a second. I've got this coworker who's been being a jerk for 2 years. Who am I going to be annoyed with besides the coworker? The person who should have held that person accountable, right? Right. So you can borrow some points here. Now, I'm going to use this phrase one more time. I know I'm preaching to the choir in the sense that, we're talking about morale, we're talking about leadership being the source of morale. This is not rocket science. But I do believe that most managers don't actually have this concept on their radar. And we're going to actually get a little bit deeper into this. I would tell you what, I was in an organization, right, actually about a mile from here. Please don't try to guess. And I was vetting them as they were vetting us. And I was looking at their manual. They have this this employee workbook or manual. And there's a section in their manual called employee responsibilities. And the very first bullet point, I'm not even kidding, said, employees shall have high morale. What do you think the punishment is when you don't have high morale, right, in that organization?
Like that old teacher used to see, the meetings will continue.
Until morale increases. That's exactly right. I mean that was the first thing I thought of when I read this. This was a real-life Dilbert cartoon right in front of me, right? Employees shall have high morale, right? Which shows an absolute misunderstanding of this concept of morale. Because workplace morale is not a function of the individual employee more than about 8%.
Did you take them on as a client?
I actually did. I wasn't our most successful client, but let's not talk about that. So, to believe that morale is the employee's job is focusing solely, of course, on the orange circle, and it's going to be a huge miss, right? Because that's not what it's about. Skilled managers equals high morale, equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for or punish for. And this is a really simplistic concept, but I want you to memorize this because this is going to be foundational as we go forward. Skilled managers is how you get high morale, and high morale is the only route, it's the requirement to get all the stuff that you listed earlier that you cannot pay more for and you can't punish for. And again, this is where I usually say this. It's not rocket science, and I know it's intuitive, but I don't believe that every manager has this on their radar. That's what morale's about. Now the problem is, what word in that formula have we not dug into yet? Skilled. And this is where we get to the Peter Principle. So does anybody know the Peter Principle? Here's how it works. Very snarky principle. Employees tend to get promoted to their level of incompetence. Now, please don't sit here and be insulted, but let me tell you how this works, because this actually happens in almost every organization. Here's how it works. At least to some degree, it's happening here. Here's how it works. You are a really good fill-in-the-blank accountant. To reward you, we're going to do what? Make you the manager of the accountants, because the very skills that made you a good accountant automatically make you a good manager, right? You're a really good engineer. To reward you, we're going to make you the manager of the engineers, because the skills that make you a great engineer also make you a great manager, right? No. especially engineers. Just kidding. Just kidding. Any engineers in the room, don't be mad at me. I work with a lot of engineers. The analogy is this. You're a really good nurse. Starting Monday, we're going to make you the surgeon. Now, is it possible that that nurse watched enough surgeries for 30 years that he or she could go and do a surgery? It's possible. But I'm not going to go to that hospital, right? I'm not going to take that risk. And I consider this not only sad, I consider it insulting. The implication is that management is not an actual skill set. And this happens everywhere. And it's not as black and white as I just said. Normally when we look at the engineer or the accountant, we're seeing some people skills, right? We're seeing something. So I'm not saying it's as black and white as all that. It's not necessarily random. Although, side note, in some organizations, it's very random. In fact, there are some organizations, believe it or not, that promote people because they've been there longer than everyone else.
The power of hanging around.
The power of hanging around. That's enough to get me into a management role, right? So that's the ultimate Peter Principle. But most organizations, even that aren't doing it that poorly, are doing Peter Principle to some degree. In fact, Peter Principle is happening when you ask a group of managers, how much leadership management training did you get when you got here to become a manager? Well, if the answer is 0 or close, that's a really good sign that we're doing some Peter Principle. Right? And so I'm not saying this to insult anybody. It happens all the time. It happened to me when I was 23 in one of my jobs. It just happens, right? And it's nothing to be ashamed of, although it's something we need to fix. Because here's the problem. The higher you go in an organization, the more people you impact, right? Now, you had the skills to do the job you were doing before, but now you've moved to a place where you don't have all the skills, and you're still expected to do that job. And now you're impacting more people. That's how we get low morale work environments, and that's how we get a lot of other problems that come with that. Does that ring true? Any questions or comments about that concept?
I think the other flip side to it is that sometimes people get promoted into those roles even though that's not what they aspire to be. Mm-hmm. And so
they're not even motivated.
It's their growth path that's
Yes.
defined by the organization, and there aren't alternative growth paths that
Yes.
allow them to stay out of management.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We believe in having more than one track that we would call growth, because the idea that only getting to a place where you're leading others is, if that's the only growth track, that's not necessarily a skill set everybody has or even wants. And so that's unfortunate if that's the only track to development and growth, right? Any other comments or thoughts on this, on morale or the Peter Principle? What's the antidote? No, first the snarky cartoon. And then, what's the antidote to the Peter Principle? What's the antidote? How do we fix the Peter Principle? It's pretty obvious. Yeah, it's training. It's really, I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it's a really simple concept, right? This is everything from a really good onboarding process for managers to ongoing training. And specifically, I want to kind of narrow in on this. The kind of training that we're talking about is not, hey, managers, everyone just run out and find some random training somewhere. Everybody just go find whatever you want and come back. That's not horrible. It's better than nothing. It's not super helpful. There's no way you're going to come back on the same page, right? There's no way you're going to come back holding each other accountable to certain types of leadership skills. There's no way that actually builds into the culture. The kind of leadership training we're talking about is what we're doing right now, which is where leaders get together and we say, let's lead from the same sheet of music. Let's learn some high impact, some value-based skills, some best practices, and let's do those together, and let's make sure we're held accountable to that. So that's the answer right there. So here's the bottom line, folks. Morale is your job. And that's kind of what I want to get on your radar as you're coming into work in the morning. Right? It's not your whole job, of course, but it's your job.